Welcome back to contract questions from clients. And Sam, this one, thanks again for joining us. Is an interesting one because we definitely see this as when you're trying to develop a business. But I would like to put into the contract that we might agree to ownership in the future. Can we do that?
So the technical answer is yes, you can put it in there. I think the issue comes down to enforceability. Agreements to agree are necessarily uncertain, and that sort of goes against the point of a contract, which is to allocate risk through certainty. So you can put it in there, but you may sort of raise your own risk exposure by doing so, because you're sort of violating that basic concept of certainty. And so, if there's a question about enforcement and there's a dispute and it goes before, say, a judge or something, you're essentially asking them to do one of two things, and that's either to imply a contract or to look outside the four corners of a contract. A judge is typically going to be very reticent to look outside the four corners, but you may get some courts that are willing to imply a contract that's sort of based on the intent of the parties. And the reason this raises your risk profile is because, at the very best, they'll honor your severability clause, throw out the uncertain term, and move forward with the rest of the contract, which would actually be fine. But if you get a judge that's willing to imply the intent of the parties and they sort of miss the mark, you may end up with a provision that neither of you wanted, which is now an enforceable part of the contract, and it raises a whole other set of questions. So my preference would be to leave it out and have it either as a verbal or side agreement of some sort rather than as a part of the main contract.
And Michael, what are your thoughts?
I like Sam's perspective if the reason you're wanting that in there is for, to have some potential enforcement to it. If, on the other hand, you have parties that are trying to align expectations and they desire to date first and then get married later and want to talk a little bit about what that might look like, and the goal is just to create alignment and not enforceability, then I think it can be beneficial to add some provision that is in essence non-binding and just talks about here's our expectations if all goes well, and then have language that gives you makes it clear that it's not a binding part of the agreement. I've had clients try to do a binding, this is how we're going to work together now, and 2 years from now you're going to be an owner and it's going to be X, Y, and Z, and if written right, they can be enforceable. And every time that's happened, the few times it's happened against our advice, they've been a disaster because it hasn't worked out during that first phase, the contract phase, and then they have this potential binding contract, and you get into the problems that Sam just mentioned.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to you next time.